Hello. I look terrible with dark glasses on, and I look stupid with a red hat on. What am I, a hitman or something? I guess a hitman wouldn't wear a red hat. Uh, so, apparently the video is working. I just made a video, and it worked for however long that was. So that's not a problem. I do have a lot of problems though. I've got my ham radio license. I haven't hardly turned my amateur radio on. It's around here someplace. Man, I heard all over. Here's my ham radio.
Tonight, mostly clear. Not as cool with lows in the upper 50s. South winds 10 to 15 miles an hour. Friday, mostly sunny and breezy. Highs in the mid-70s. South winds 15 to 20 miles.
Okay, let me go back to, let's see. Oops. It's going to need to be charged here in a little bit.
Cloud.
Okay, I can't see. I think it's on channel 78.
30 miles an hour.
Yeah. Let's go back to 1. It should be quiet, you know. It's okay. I've even got satellite frequencies in here from the space shuttle and what have you. Okay, we're down to channel 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. Guess I should show you what the dial looks like if I can get up there close enough to. Let's see if you can see it. I'm looking at my. I don't think you can see that. Okay. I'll just have to read it out to you. Channel 13, 15. Okay, channel 20. Most of these are amateur radio clubs that have set up repeaters, so you can talk through their repeater to somebody further away than what you could reach them if you were just doing radio to radio. But then also they're set up so you can actually talk to people worldwide. Several years back I was demonstrating to somebody. Well, okay, one time it was to Hillary when she came back from Sweden, and she lived there for 5 or 6 years or whatever. I said, "Now, where did you stay?" You know, so I looked on the list or whatever, and dialed in, talked to a guy that was a farmer or something or other, working in his field, an amateur radio operator, working through a local repeater that was connected, you know, all the way to me in Texas. We're up to 55 channel, 61, 69. There's a whole bunch of people if you want to find out about amateur radio.
You're listening to NOAA, All Hazards Radio.
There's a whole bunch of help files on there's even, well, more than one, but there's a ham radio operator here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who has a YouTube site, and he makes a whole bunch of videos, and he makes good videos about, when he started out, I forget, I donated money every month or something, or maybe it was every year. It wasn't very much. Okay, we're picking, here's the ISS, International Space Station, but I don't hear anything. Let's see. You know, even with a handheld, I haven't done it, even with just a handheld or walkie-talkie, you can, under the certain right conditions or whatever, you know, talk to a astronaut on the International Space Station. I've tracked them and picked up the beacon, beep, 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 beep. There's an awful lot of fun, but I think, okay, I'm going to stop this. There's nobody on right now. Oops, I just transmitted. I didn't mean to do that. Because it's been so long since I've had this thing on. There we go, I shut it off. To get an amateur radio license is really easy, especially, which I have, for the technician's class. That's the beginning class, or that's a license. And really, I helped a couple. I remember like one police officer from the police department that I was a reserve officer with. He was a full-time officer there. He came over to my house because the local school there was having a testing for the amateur radio license, and he came over, and there was a site that I had on saved on my computer that you could log into, and it would ask you the test questions, and then tell you when you were wrong, and so he came over and he went through the test, and he missed too many that he would be able to, so then he ran it again and just kept running it. And I liked him and everything, but I thought, God damn, I wish he'd go home, But then when he got done taking the practice test or whatever, I rode with him over to the school over there, grade school or high school, I forget which, and he took the test and he passed. So that the technician's class, and that's what I am, it's very easy to pass. My son passed, well, except the first, okay, I said, now just, go through the questions here, or do it online or whatever. And he told me real quick, I'm ready, while we drove over there. And I was pissed because I knew that but he said he wanted to go take the test. So we got over there, and it was in Overland Park, Kansas, or whatever, and they have some fancy streets. Well, they also have some poor areas, but mainly it's people with a lot of money. And so we went over, and then we got in the area, and you had to be there at a certain time, let's say 7 p.m. or whatever. And we're over there, and I can't find the place. I can't find it, it's like, 10 or 15 minutes past the start of the thing, and I'm cussing, which I do more now than I didn't used to do cussing and stuff. Now I do, unfortunately. But I have excuses. Yeah, I'm driven to it, But we got over there, and it was like, 15 minutes past, and they're not going to let you in, But anyway, I said, let's go in, So we went in, and the amateur radio operator, who was one of the 3 people, that takes 3, to, give you the exam to make sure you do everything right, and you don't cheat or anything like that. But we went in, and it was Tom Wheeler. You might have heard me mention him, but you wouldn't remember it. But he was a graduate of KU in electrical engineering, University of Kansas, and back a few years before that, he just got out of college, I guess, or whatever. I think though he was working for a company, and he was writing some software to make the machines for the Radio Shack Coco, their color computer or something, and he was writing the software for the company so that telling the machine what to do, hook this into this and do that kind of stuff like that. And then he called into, back then, my computer bulletin board system running on a Radio Shack Model 1 computer. And then he called in. Back then, a whole bunch of people across the United States were using fake names. because the story going around was that Southwest, at that time, Southwest Bell and AT&T were one major corporation. There might have been something else in there too. The federal government eventually came along and said, okay, and made them separate, which made then you had, you know, Southwestern Bell telephone, and then all across the United States these things broke off into their own corporations. And the telephone company made more money than, made the big time bucks. But anyway, the story had gone around that, well, too, the phone company, they were a bunch of assholes back then when it was separate. Well, maybe even when after it was separated, but when it was separate, right? If you wanted to make a long distance, okay, I lived in Missouri. If you wanted to make a long distance telephone call in Missouri, you'd have to sell one of your firstborn kids or something. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was cheaper to call a long distance than it was to call from Kansas City to St. Louis or something, you know. But and two, the phone company you could not, when you had a phone, say you had a phone installed by the phone company, well, you had to have it installed by the phone company. Have it installed by the phone company. Now, say you wanted an extension cord, you know, say you had a handicapped relative or something who needed a phone by them to call, you know, well, 911 didn't exist, but, you know, call the police or the fire or ambulance or something. You could not, you know, just run a phone and plug it into the thing. No, the phone company had to send somebody out to do that. It was a racket, a real racket. But anyway, the bulletin board people like myself, we figured out, you know, one thing we could do. It's in BBS, the documentary, if you want to watch. Sometime I should just run it because the guy who created that and interviewed me for about 3 hours, and in his BBS, the documentary, there's about, if you add them all together, my little comments here, you know, there's like 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes of me, you know, but these were spread out, you know. Now, of course, the guy who really invented the first bulletin board system in Chicago, I think it was, and he and another guy did it. You know, they were in Chicago, and there was a snowstorm, and they couldn't get to where they wanted to get together to talk about computers and or do that kind of stuff. So the guy set up you know, one guy was doing the hardware part, and another guy was doing the software, and that's where the bulletin board systems and things started. What else? I look terrible with these glasses on, but I have to have the glasses on to see. I mentioned in a previous video, I think, that I just went through having cataracts removed from both eyes and all that kind of stuff, and I now have excellent. I'm 83 and I have excellent vision, and it's just going to get a little bit better. I mean, I'm done with it, except I still have to take some drops for the eyes for a while. And but I have already excellent vision, right and left eye. But for up close, I have to have something like this. Now they're going to, if I want, make me some glasses later, or I can just use these. They cost like $2.50 at the dollar store or something, you know. Oh, anyway, so this guy called in, the guy that, you know, Tom Wheeler. I didn't know him at that point. And he used a fake name, of course, and because everybody was afraid. Now, I wasn't, but everybody else was afraid, and the phone company didn't do that, you know. But, and I didn't care. When they logged in, I just wanted them to, you know, like don't do the happy hacker, or don't do something like that. I just insisted that they use a real name. It didn't have to be their real name. It just had to be a real name that sounded like a real name. But I had kind of fun because I wrote the software myself, and there was this young guy, and he wanted, I think, I forget, Happy Hacker or something. And I said, no, you can't do that. And so he still put it in. So I put in a thing that searched, the string for Happy Hacker, and then wouldn't let him log in. So then I looked, and he was logged in, Happy Hacker, So I looked at it, okay, oh, I see, he has a blank space under the last letter. So I wrote the software to check I was having fun doing that. I had a lot of fun doing that. But, so I checked to make sure there was no blank before the first letter or before or after the last letter or something. But right away he came up with a fix for that. And then finally I got it. Anyway, Tom Wheeler called in. And he said, oh, what kind of computer are you use? I said, a Radio Shack Model 1. And he said, which I was kind of surprised about, what kind of storage are you using, And I said, well, I can't afford a hard drive, that's for sure. They were like hundreds of dollars for, if you could get a 10 meg, it was like $150, $200, $300 or something like that. For the Radio Shack Model 1, you had to buy the box that went underneath it. And the only thing that box underneath your monitor did was allow you to have a hard drive. And it allowed you to put in a little tiny bit more of memory. And I mean a little tiny bit. I think it was 48 is most you could have. But you had to have that box. Of course, I bought a different box. But anyway, he says, well, what kind of, and I said, well, I'm sure you never, heard of this. And I said, it's something called an Electron Stringy Floppy. And it was this, this size. But there was several connectors on the back, so you could hook up these little tiny tapes on it. Well, there was one connector. There was one place you could plug it on. But I had like 5 of these things, which was still cheaper than and I had 5 of them and one in each. And then when I did my programming, if somebody logged in, I'd have, tape number 1, write it to a certain tape in that thing. If it was some messages or whatever, I would have it do, to make it so when it was doing searches, all would be much better. Anyway, I said, I know you never heard of that. And he says, yeah, he says, I wrote it. And I said, no, you didn't. A guy by the name of Tom Wheeler did it. And he said, I am Tom Wheeler. He says, I heard that the phone company was, whatever. And so then he said, oh, you must have a terrific, and I said, no, it's just a Radio Shack computer. Where instead of a tape recorder, I hooked up the Electron string, whatever. And he said, I graduated, degree in telecommunications or electrical engineering or something, I forget what. And he said, I'd like to see your outfit. And I said, well, there's not much to see. I said, if you want to, you can come over, So he came over, and then he asked us, to see and I had it printed out on paper, And I said, you can have a copy of it. Before he got there, I knew he'd want one. I printed it out, and then gave it to him. And he said, is it okay if I take this and try to improve it a little bit or something? I said, great, I would need all the help I can get. So 2 or 3 days later he called and he said, is it okay if I come over? I got I modified your BBS program. So he brought it over and he had made changes to it. And I knew then that, but I had fun learning BASIC. In order to do, with Radio Shack computer, a book on BASIC came, and I didn't understand any computer programming, And so there was 2 or 3 bulletin board systems in Kansas City. One just happened to be a guy who wrote a BBS program for the Radio Shack computer, and it was neat, and so it was only like, so I think all of us, we'd call in to make sure make a connection, We didn't tie up the guy's computer for very long or whatever. And of course later on we purchased extra. landlines coming in and stuff. But this guy he was an asshole. Can't remember his name now. And he jumped on me several times. I mean, and one time I just wanted to do like the other people were doing, checking in, to, hey, and connected, oh, what's new, that kind of stuff. So I logged in, and then I was typing a message to the sysop, or maybe to somebody else. I was typing a message, and he goes, that always shocked some. Of course, I was, a system operator, but that shocked the hell out, especially like there was very few women for years that were, that was a boy thing, a man thing. And, but when a PBS documentary, there's, I think she was an ex nun, I believe she said in this video. But she talked about if when she logged into any bulletin board system, she might be the only female that was signed up or whatever, and the systops would jump in right away, because most of these people were 16 years old or something like that, doing it. It was just boom. But anyway, okay, so I logged into this TRS radio, the thing the guy wrote, and he did a great job for systops. They could buy his program. I never sold my program. I gave it to Tom Wheeler and said, it's yours, whatever. But I had to call him a few times because he was very smart, too smart, I think, because I asked him a few times, what about, and then he would deliberately, he wouldn't explain it. I'm sure if he was that smart, he could explain it and, make it, but he didn't. And he worked later on, he worked for a college as a, instructor, and on, computers and programming language and all that kind of stuff. And I would feel sorry because the way he wanted you to know how smart he was. So he was going to, because I asked him a few questions about, what if, and he just, and I think, okay, never mind, It wasn't that he didn't want, he just wanted to show how smart he was, and he was smart. But anyway, I think I've mentioned this before, that I had to call him several times, and then when I would call him, he'd say no, and I'd say, yes, your software doesn't, of course it was my software, and he barely changed it. Before long, I didn't recognize it, and I knew too, okay, no software writing for me. But, okay, one was, I had a thing in there to keep somebody from using, naughty words or something in the name or something. Anyway, some guy calls in, and he says, it won't let me, Jim, it won't let me log in. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, it won't let me put my name in. I said, okay, so you're John Hancock, right? Yeah. So I typed it in. I said, you're right, it won't let you enter that name. And I said, whoops, I think I know. John Hancock? Okay, that's what it is. So I called Tom Wheeler and I said, and he said, no, I wrote that code, and he wrote it, but I wrote it, but he improved, by a stack or what. I looked through it, and I thought, okay, what's this stack? Or whatever. And then it was the same too when somebody at some point, like, somebody couldn't log in as a member, and I said, well, just put your name in, No, it doesn't work. I said, just a second. And I said, yeah, you're right, it doesn't let you in. And so then I looked at the code, and Tom had added an array or something like that, which I didn't know what that was. And then I saw something rather in parenthesis, 500. Okay, so I called him up and I said, well, you said no. He said that's fine, it works. I said, no, it doesn't. I said, because it's got, I said, what's this array 500? And then he Oh yeah, I set that so you wouldn't have more than 500 people or whatever. He says, I'll fix that. Okay, but anyway, this guy, um, the point I'm getting at is um, that this guy who was a real asshole made me be a much better person. Well, I wasn't a bad person at that point, but I did not want to be like this guy, like this guy. Anyway, I called into the bulletin board system, just kind of checking. He didn't mind. He wanted people to call in and check it out and try it out. Anyway, I started typing and hitting the carriage return, the enter key or whatever it was. And he comes on, what in the, of course he was typing it. What in the matter is you, how fucking stupid are you? You can't be this fucking stupid. And I said, I don't know why you're upset. What did I do wrong? And he said, I just installed where you just keep typing when you're writing a message and it wraps around. You don't hit carriage return at the end of it. And I said, well, okay. I said, I didn't know something like that because I didn't use word processing or something. I said, I'm sorry. I said, I'll try not to do it again, but, I've been hitting the carriage return for a long time. But then I decided, him being the way he was and the way some of these other people were, and so that worked out fine for me. A lot of these others were fighting with each other. If you had an Apple computer, you had to have an Apple computer when you logged into their system. If you had a Radio Shack, whatever, or the other types of computers that had come out. So anyway, I saw where just recently that Tom Wheeler had died. He was an amateur radio operator also, by the way. And God, I didn't know. Well, the last time I saw him was at his house. I don't think he was married at that point, a long time ago. And anyway, I had my son with me because my son wanted to see a amateur radio operator's receiver and transmitter that would transmit around the world instead of, I had a handy talkie, and that was it, because all I had was a technician's license, and you needed a general. I think it was general at that time in order for and then there was I had a technician, general was next, and then advanced or something. And I never advanced. I was lucky to get in it. Lucky to get the bait, although it's very easy. You can easily get your amateur radio license, and you can get, this was a little bit expensive. I think a couple hundred or something like that. But you can get them very cheap. $29, $30, $40. It doesn't have as many quality. By the way, I just happen to put this. You don't have to have an antenna that's kind of sticky in the neck or something. So anyway, we were there, and my son was really impressed. And he went, and my son, well, that was my son. I mentioned before here, I took my son to get his license. Oh, and that Tom Wheeler was there. And so when that's the next step. I forget things. That's why I have to tell the story 50 times before you get the whole story. We went in, and I didn't think we were going to be seen, and there was Tom Wheeler, the guy from way back years ago. I saw where he just recently died, and I think he had 5, grown, I think daughters, or maybe 5 altogether, 5 grown kids or something. So, but, amateur radio, there's mainly old people now, it seems like. Sure, you can look at QST magazine or something, or you can go to some site or club or whatever, and sure, there's going to be some dad or somebody who taught his little daughter, how to be a ham radio operator and that kind of stuff. But anyway, well, too, after I decided to be I always decided to be, I never was a bad guy. But when I was a person, when the first internet service company came to Kansas City, Missouri, I read about it or whatever, and I went right down. I went down there, and they weren't expecting to see anybody come into their back door. It was like a factory, sort of. I'm not sure they did have a desk out there, you know. So I knocked on whatever, and the guy came, and I said, I'd like to sign up for your service. And he said, wow. He said, people usually call. And I said, well, I was in a hurry. And he said, okay. And he said, okay, your name? I said, Jim Howard. Jim Howard. Of Howard's Notebook? Are you Jim Howard? I said, yes. He says, when I was in high school or grade school or whatever, I called in. I got a modem for Christmas from my parents, you know, and I called in and you talked to me and encouraged me and all kinds of stuff. And he said, he says, you know, Bob or whatever. He said, just a minute, I got to get Bob. And Bob, come out here, come out here, come out here. And Bob comes out, you know, thinking there's some kind of a problem, you know, something the guy doesn't know. And this is Jim Howard of Howard's Notebook. And the guy says, oh, when I was in school, I called into you and you talked to me in the chat and blah, 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 you know. So that was a lot of fun. And it's one reason I just continued doing what I'm doing now, sort of a continuation. But if that one guy hadn't been such a prick, you know, I'd have been a different person. No, I don't think I've always I hear something going. Dara must be watching something. Well, our cat is sick. I'm afraid, really bad sick. And so Dara's got it up on her bed. It couldn't jump up now and get up on the bed itself now. I don't know what I'm worried about is Hillary, one of my daughters, one of our daughters. And she lives slightly outside of Fort Worth. And she has a little bit of land, and she loves all animals. I mean, all animals, and she has spent thousands of dollars when, you know, she makes good money. She doesn't have the education that some of our other, you know, kids have, but she is a hard worker, and she loves animals, and she makes the job that she does. She makes really good money doing it, but she is spending it for cats. Now she's up to the point using credit cards, and one of them is like, I don't know, 20 years old or maybe older, you know, and I think that cat would like to go to cat heaven, because the Pope says that, you know, dogs and your pets can go to heaven. The College of Cardinals and people, I don't think we're not happy with the Pope saying that, but almost makes me want to go back into the church. I didn't bail out, by the way, because of molestation by a priest or anything like that. Mine is more political. In the United States, and I'm sure in other countries too, you have the bishops, the cardinals, you know, and they have their meetings, you know, and that type of stuff. And it's split, you know, like take the cardinals. The bishops are called the princes of the church too, you know, but the cardinal is, well, you know, he's living in a nice house with a maid, you know, and maybe a chauffeur and the whole thing. And, you know, well, Biden, it's not just Biden, it's any Catholic priest before that, John F. Kennedy or, you know, whatever. People are they're going to, you know, say, you know, the bishop or whatever, but like Biden, you know, Biden goes to church. He's done that all his life. And when he was a kid, he's gone to church every Sunday, you know. And but you'll have some cardinal, maybe even a parish priest, you know. And I thought when I heard about that, some parish priest someplace. Of course, I don't go to church, and I was an altar boy, and I didn't leave the church because I wasn't molested. You know, I left the church for other reasons, but had nothing to do with the, you know, molestation of boys or anything. I left for political reasons because these priests and bishops and whatever, not the priests so much, I think, but the bishops, you know, and the cardinal. they're living high off the hog, and whatever, because they're princes of the church, and so they will. If Biden comes out for abortion should be, allowed or something, whatever it is, it could be anything, and you'll have some priest someplace that will say he cannot receive communion from in this church, or if the bishop in this parish or whatever, and that's the reason that I left the church. And I don't know, it wasn't not recently, but back a few years ago, and I think I blogged about that. Some priest someplace said that whoever was running, who was a Catholic, could not receive communion in the church because of their political stand on something. And I think I blogged about it, or maybe that was when I was doing my WordPress site. Not WordPress. Yeah, WordPress. I made a thing that said if I were a member of that congregation, and that when the pastor gets up and says, let's see, who's a Catholic? Biden, John F. Kennedy, who else? Anyway, I said, if I were there, I would get up, step out of the aisle and whatever and say, Father, you're wrong to do, you shouldn't refuse somebody who's a Catholic, access to the sacrament because you politically don't agree with their, opinion on something, and I'd have walked out or whatever. And then I went through into some depth. Okay, I'd have walked out and probably walked out alone, but sure, it would have been great, if a whole bunch of others would have gotten up too, but I doubt they would have, Of course, maybe I would have walked out. Maybe there'd have been a cute nun out there who liked me or something, Just joking. Okay, thanks very much for watching. And the thing is still running. So, a problem that I thought I had, I don't have right now. Anyway, amateur radio is I'm not done yet. It's really interesting. You can do all types of stuff. You can talk on a walkie-talkie around the world. You can just do all kinds of things. It was really neat before people had cell phones, and I'd be out patrolling or just out, and house on fire, car accident or something like that. And I mentioned this the other day, so I shouldn't go through it again. I'd take my radios in my car, and then I'd call. They didn't have 911. They, of course, had dispatchers. But you'd need to tell the dispatcher, I'm on a ham radio communicating with you, so that they would know that, you didn't have a phone number or that type of stuff. And but that was kind of nice. Then for a little bit over a year, I had a patrol service, and I was the only, a wife at that time, she answered the phone, and they would call me on the CB radio, because I wasn't a ham radio operator then. I wasn't a ham radio operator at that point. And we used channel 9, which you were not supposed to use, but we used channel 9. It was for emergency purposes, but by that time, the ham radio or the CB operators, they weren't using their, call sign. They're not using their call signs. And then finally, the FCC just gave up on it. Let those people do what they want to do. But not in the other range. It's a heavy. You can be charged with a lot of money by transmitting. On if you're not. And one night I was filling in for net control or something. What wasn't that? Well, for some reason I was on. I think maybe it wasn't during a net. No, I think somebody just called in, and I could tell they weren't a ham radio operator. So I answered, and they said something like, we're EMS or emergency, whatever it was. I knew they were, police department using amateur radio, or a fire department or dispatch or something like all that kind of stuff. And so they were letting me know, hey, well, we're police. No, I don't care whether you're a fireman, policeman, or whatever. You're not supposed to. And there's, I think it'd be like, it can go up to. Of course, they're not going to immediately issue a $10,000 fine on you or something. But they can, and they can. So anyway, I didn't try to give them a lecture or anything. I just said, what you need to do is contact an amateur radio club and check into all this kind of stuff, what the rules are and things like that. I think they said again, well, we're, emergency medical, or they didn't say emergency medical, but something, like, whatever. And I didn't. So then when the next time they had a net, at that time I was checking into a lot of nets. I just check in. Go outside and walk around, get a little exercise, and call in on the radio. But the next time they had the net control, whatever, said, last week, 2 people checked in or whatever, and they should have been, so he was meaning me, they should have been told that it was against the law for them to, it didn't hurt my feelings or anything, and when I was talking to them, and I only talked to them for a very short piece of time, very short, contact a ham radio club. But anyway, this guy was, the ham radio operator was saying, yeah, they should have been told, but, I said, no, I didn't say anything, because they were going to think we're the police or we're the fire or whatever, but no. Now the FCC, if it's an emergency, the FCC is not going to, well, ham radio operators have, now they need to be really, I've never done that, they need to be really careful not to, even though you can, you have the capabilities of doing it. You shouldn't go, if somebody breaks their leg or something like that, use the telephone. If you're someplace where there's no telephone or whatever, be really, really careful about, calling into, I would, recommend not doing it unless it's really an emergency. Somebody's broke a leg and an artery is bleeding, or, and you're someplace up in the mountains, ham radio operators can do that. Ham radio operators can do a lot other. They're authorized to do that. Pretty neat. Although things have changed now where everybody has a cell phone and all that kind of stuff. But it was really neat back in the olden days. Okay, thank you very much for watching.